Who is this Jedi?
Ahsoka Tano.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the premiere of Ahsoka. Now, we are covering both episodes, but if you've only seen episode 1, don't worry, I marked a chapter below for you to come back and watch our breakdown of episode 2. We found lots of obscure Easter eggs that tie the show into Rebels, Clone Wars, Mandalorian, and even some hints about where the heck the show is going from here. Get out of here!
Where was that?
Stupid pop-up ad. So, let's start with this episode. We begin with the sound of tribal drums. Now, the score for the series was done by Star Wars veteran Kevin Kiner, who did Clone Wars, Rebels, and some of his best work on The Bad Batch. Now, because this series is a sequel to Star Wars Rebels, he returns a lot of the themes from that show. For instance, we hear Hera's Rebels theme when we first meet her in the series. And then we go to the Star Wars TV show logo opening, featuring several characters: Vader, a protocol droid, clone trooper, HK assassin droid, the Sith Inquisitor Merrick, Hu Yang, Stormtrooper, Chopper, and Sabine Wren. Now, usually these alternate red and blue between good guys and bad guys, but not in this first episode for some reason. So the opening crawl with this red font reminded me a lot of the final episodes of Dave Filoni's Clone Wars series, where the titles for the episodes appeared in red without the usual Clone Wars fanfare. And this opening crawl is more like a dour 70s fantasy movie than the Flash Gordon-esque Star Wars crawl that we've known before. Get away! This immediately sets a darker tone for the series. It implies that while Han, Luke, and Leia are off having bright adventures, Ahsoka is off to the side, fighting in the shadows. Although the crawl does follow the same rules as the typical Star Wars crawl, with certain nouns like Evil Galactic Empire capitalized, and this phrase, Sinister Agents, is also how Leia's pursuers were named in the crawl to A New Hope. This crawl also does a great job of summing up where we're at in the galactic story, but frankly, I think they should have included like another one for people who have not seen Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah, like I've never seen Star Wars Rebels and I was totally lost.
You never saw Rebels? Well, actually, we have a full recap up now, but basically, oh my gosh!
What is it?
Jeez, oh my god, they're everywhere. This is so annoying.
Person, what are we gonna do? Our video is now infested with ads.
I got this. Hold on just a second. Wait, here we go, and done.
Whoa, what did you do?
Well, Doug, I turned on my NordVPN ad blocker and boom, no more ads. See guys, I've been using NordVPN for almost 3 years now, and it is unbelievable how much time and money NordVPN has saved me. For one, it's an incredible ad blocker, and it's the only ad blocker I use. But also, because of NordVPN, I was able to cancel almost every streaming service I used to subscribe to. So here's a true story. The other day, I was talking to my wife about Back to the Future, and she said, oh, I've never seen Back to the Future. And I was like, oh my god, we should totally watch Back to the Future.
Yeah, we should watch Back to the Future.
Right? We should. So I check, it's not on Netflix, and you've been here before. You search for like where this movie's streaming, then you either have to subscribe to a new service with a trial period you forget about, or you have to just pay the money to rent the movie, which is frustrating because we pay for so many streaming services. So instead, I looked up another country where Back to the Future was streaming, and it was streaming in France. So I used NordVPN to change my location to France, and we watched Back to the Future. Now, I also thought it was funny how on French Netflix, they use this black and white image like a stereotypical French film would.
Vous savez, Pierre, c'est le premier slip move que je vois.
Pierre, mais et pourquoi vous m'appelez toujours Pierre?
So this is one of the many reasons I love having NordVPN as a sponsor for this video. They also offer threat protection, which protects you from malicious sites, downloads, trackers, and intrusive ads. Like if you do click on a suspicious attachment in your email, we've all done it accidentally before, then threat protection deletes that download before it finishes, protecting your desktop from getting infected. And today, we've got a special deal for our subscribers. If you go to nordvpn.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description and purchase a 2-year plan, you get 4 months for free plus a huge discount, and you can take advantage of their 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, back to Ahsoka. I'm going to sum up Star Wars Rebels for you very quickly. So that show followed a small rebel cell called the Spectres in the years before A New Hope. Ahsoka, who had survived the Jedi Purge, was the handler for this cell, handing them assignments from the greater Rebel Alliance leaders. The Spectres consisted of characters we see on this show like Hera and Sabine Wren, also Zeb, who cameoed in The Mandalorian, the droid Chopper, and a former Padawan named Kanan Jarrus and his new apprentice Ezra. And the series ends with Ezra facing off against Imperial Grand Admiral Thrawn using hyperspace traveling whales called the Purgil to whisk them off to parts unknown. In Season 2 of The Mandalorian, Din Djarin helped Ahsoka Tano capture Morgan Elsbeth, leading to this question.
Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
So Thrawn is one of the greatest Star Wars villains ever, coming originally from the books, appearing in Rebels, and launching his own excellent canon novels. And remember, in The Mandalorian Season 3, we found out that the Imperial Shadow Council is wanting to install Thrawn as their new leader.
Grand Admiral Thrawn's return will
heralding the reemergence of our military.
And by the way, everybody, if you like what we do here at the channel and you like our Star Wars coverage, then we have lots of merchandise at our very own merch store that I think you will love. There's this sweet brand new Apprentice Lives t-shirt, the Hello There.
Hello there.
And my new favorite shirt, the Prequel Apologist. Thanks, George. Right now we have a Labor Day sale going on. All t-shirts are 10% off with the code SCOPENING. Plus we have classics like our original trilogy and Somehow Palpatine Returned. Links to the products are below. Guys, shopping our merch store is the best way to support our channel. We appreciate you looking around and helping us out. So, we open on Morgan Elsbeth's prison ship, and I gotta tell you, the New Republic is terrible at holding on to their prisoners. Din liberated this guy in season 1 of The Mandalorian, and Moff Gideon escaped his prison shuttle. Now, in The Mandalorian, the task force invaded an actual prison ship that was mostly manned by droids. As we see throughout this series, the New Republic has whittled down 90% of its military, trying to restore the galaxy to the way it was before the Clone Wars, like totally demilitarized.
Not a great plan.
But in this episode, it seems like the Republic has learned its lesson because they are transporting Morgan Elsbeth on a battle cruiser that looks a lot like the medium transports the Rebels used to escape Hoth in The Empire Strikes Back. This protocol droid looking at navigation charts seems like a visual reference to C-3PO doing the same thing in the original trilogy. I would say it's a coincidence, but Dave Filoni loves putting callbacks to the original trilogy in his work. The military officers' uniforms are also from the original trilogy, with one being worn here by Crix Maydeen in Return of the Jedi. And also like in Jedi, we have a Jedi warrior using an outdated clearance code to get access to military assets.
The signal is an old Jedi clearance code.
It's an older code, sir, but it checks out.
Even this shot mirrors the arrival of the Imperial shuttle arriving at the Death Star in Jedi. And I gotta say, this arrogance of the captain,
I'm calling their bluff,
is foreshadowing the arrogance of the New Republic. This government allowed the First Order to grow like a weed because they were so confident in their victory that they could not see this new shadow rising in the unknown regions. And the cool thing about shows like Ahsoka is it's going to bridge that gap. We're gonna find out how we went from like rebels celebrating with teddy bears on Endor to everything basically going to shit in Episode 7. So everyone in the hangar bay is wearing these New Republic security uniforms we first saw in that same Mandalorian episode. And there is an A-Wing in the background right here. And of course, one of the security officers is Amon Kala, like the famous rebel leader, Admiral Raddus.
Rogue One, may the Force be with you.
Then we meet former Jedi Baylan Skoll and his apprentice, Shin Hati. Baylan is played by the late, great Ray Stevenson, who this episode is dedicated to. Now their names, Skoll and Hati, are from Norse mythology. These are wolves, the sons of the wolf Fenrir. You know, this wolf from Ragnarok. Now, in Norse mythology, it is said that these are the wolves that chase the sun and moon across the sky, and as prophesied, they will do so until Ragnarok. But then at Ragnarok, the wolves will catch the moon and sun and devour them. Now, Dave Filoni loves wolves. There's the Loth Wolves in Star Wars Rebels. The wolves created a portal in the world between worlds. His character's name in The Mandalorian is called Trapper Wolf. So, like, all of this is not a coincidence.
There are two wolves inside of you, and they are both written by Dave Filoni.
That's right. Now, we do have a video coming out about these two, and we explain where they could have come from, and we already posted a video about how they could both be members of the Knights of Ren. I love that video. I'm really proud of it. So make sure you subscribe, don't miss it, and ring the bell for all this Ahsoka content where we dive deep into their origins and all this other cool stuff we have planned. But I do want to point out that Baylan is an actual former Jedi, and you can see that his apprentice has a Jedi Padawan braid, just like we saw apprentices wear throughout the Clone Wars and the High Republic era. It is interesting to see that Baylan is training his apprentice in the old ways of the Jedi, but obviously with different goals. When Baylan says,
Allow me to show you our identification.
Now this is to contrast Obi-Wan using the Force for non-violence in A New Hope.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
And Baylan's rush toward violence here contrasts these two old former Jedi who survived the Purge. Once again, the score shines in this scene. Like, I love these solitary piano notes hitting almost like the melody of the Imperial March, but they're devoid of like the larger orchestra. When Kevin Kiner composed Rebels, he deliberately held off on introducing the themes from the movies because he wanted to slowly integrate them as they built up to the events of A New Hope. And now it's like he's taken those same arrangements from the original trilogy and stripped them down to show that time has now passed, and now the conflict is being reborn as something new. On the bridge, the acting captain is handed a blaster when they go to Red Alert. It's not really an Easter egg, just a very cool detail that I liked.
That is awesome, dude!
And then they free Morgan Elsbeth, aka a Night Sister of Dathomir.
What's a Mighty Sister of Dathomir?
Oh man, the Night Sisters are so cool. So, not everybody who uses the Force is like a good Jedi Knight or a super evil Sith. Those are orders of Force users, but there are many, many other types of people who use the Force. One of these are the dark side Force users called the Witches of Dathomir. Darth Maul is actually a Dathomirian Zabrak, and his mother was the leader of the Night Sisters. Her name was Mother Talzin. Actually, Mother Talzin was the one who restored Maul's mind after he survived his duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, like, Darth Sidious always had kind of an uneasy truce with these Force witches, and at the end of the Clone Wars, he ordered Count Dooku to
wipe them out.
So very few of these Force witches survive. As far as I know, it's just Merrin from the Fallen Order games and now Morgan Elsbeth. Whenever Baylan releases her, he uses the Force to unshackle her, which seemed like another callback to Return of the Jedi.
You no longer need those.
Also, they missed a golden opportunity here when Baylan asks who, and it cuts like this.
Ahsoka Tano.
But it should have gone like this.
Who is this Jedi?
But instead, they cut to her saying the name, but then they lingered as they walked off camera, maybe to show off how much this hallway looks like the Tantive 4 in A New Hope. The title of this episode is Master and Apprentice, referring to the mystery of who Baylan and his apprentice are, but also the reunion of Ahsoka and her apprentice, Sabine Wren. Then we go to Ahsoka infiltrating the ruins of a Night Sister temple, and they give her an awesome Kurosawa-esque shot of her emerging from the sands, much like this awesome shot of her in The Mandalorian that was an homage to the movie Yojimbo. When Ahsoka enters the temple, she touches the pillars to hear them through the Force, and I think this is her sensing a Force echo, one of the abilities of Cal Kestis in the Fallen Order games. And speaking of Fallen Order, this whole sequence where she aligns pillars to get orbs to glow and activate is very reminiscent of the Zepho temple in the first game, but this is a temple of the Witches of Dathomir.
Wait, what's a Zepho? Like Zepho Marx? Is that Marx brother?
No. The Zepho are an ancient race of Force users, and it is possible that they had a connection to these Force witches. But again, I'm getting distracted. I'm going to talk about that in a different video. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Now notice that the number 3 has special significance in this temple. There's these 3 figures and also a triquetra. Now this is on the floor and it represents a Celtic symbol representing the 3 in 1, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But in witchcraft, the number 3 represents the 3 stages of womanhood: the mother, the maiden, and the crone, which also represents the waning and waxing of the moon. You see, witches often appear in 3s in great works of literature like Macbeth or Hocus Pocus.
Cat's got my tongue!
After she finds the orb, the comm sound is straight from the prequels and Clone Wars. And just outside, she fights 4 HK assassin droids, which have appeared all over Star Wars, but we first saw them at the Knights of the Old Republic games. But my favorite droid in this opening sequence was Hu Yang, who is voiced by David Tennant in the Clone Wars and in this series. Now in the Clone Wars, we see Hu Yang serve his main function to help younglings construct and build lightsabers. This droid is thousands of years old, and he has a database of every lightsaber he's ever helped to create. This is a very cool way for some aspect of the Jedi Order to have survived the Jedi Purge. In fact, the game Jedi Survivor also recently introduced another droid from the High Republic era, ZN-A4, and it's interesting to see how these 2 droids have some design elements in common. Now, Hu Yang kept his distance from the planet because standard Jedi protocol says it's better for a ship to remain far away, because the Padawan and their master can take care of any trouble that happens on the surface. This is a subtle way of reminding us that Ahsoka needs a Padawan because she's going to be in a little over her head. But the show also reminds us that she's not actually a Jedi, and so she does not follow the Jedi Code, because we find out that after this,
where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
She apparently tortured Morgan for information.
Let's just say I didn't follow standard Jedi protocol.
She brings the map back to the Mon Calamari cruiser command ship, which is named Home 1. Now this is the same ship that Akbar commanded at the Battle of Endor, and this is where the Rebel Alliance gathered to plan that same attack. And of course we also see X-Wings flying around on patrol. Now Ahsoka's ship is a T-6 Jedi shuttle, which first appeared in the Clone Wars episode Children of the Force, but it was standard transportation for the Jedi all throughout the entire Clone Wars. Now during the Imperial era, I'm sure that Ahsoka traveled in something less conspicuous, but now that the Republic is restored, she is no longer in hiding. And then Hera shows up, played in live action by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Following the events of Star Wars Rebels, Hera continued to be a major leader during the rebellion. In the comics, we see her planning attacks alongside Leia, and she even got a name drop in Rogue One.
General Signals.
And her jacket is covered in Easter eggs, like the logo for Phoenix Squadron, which was designed by Sabine Wren. The symbol on her back looks like her ship the Ghost entering hyperspace, and this patch with 5 pips on it denotes her as a general. We first saw this worn by General Jan Dodonna in A New Hope, and by General Carlise Riken in Empire Strikes Back. One of the fun things about this era of Star Wars is getting to see characters from like the prequels and the Clone Wars interact with characters and places from the original trilogy. I got goosebumps in this scene. Ahsoka and Hera are in the same room where Luke rejoined the rebellion. I mean, the hologram table even makes the same sound.
It is relatively unprotected.
I also want to point out that the Rebellion modeled these early meeting rooms after the circular holo tables where the Jedi planned out their attacks in the Clone Wars, and I have to think that those tables were modeled after the original Jedi Council chamber. Like King Arthur's Round Table, this was a circle where nobody sat at the head, and this contrasts with the Sith, because the Emperor always made the line of sight drawn directly towards him. Ahsoka tells her that Thrawn is the last Grand Admiral who is still at large, which was also true in the original, now non-canon novels, which took place 5 years after Return of the Jedi. Those Timothy Zahn novels, called the Heir to the Empire trilogy, featured the very first appearance of Thrawn. Now Hera says,
"It's never a straight line with you Jedi, is it?"
And she should know, because for years she was shacked up with a Jedi and had his kid.
You think they would mention that in the show more?
You really would. And then we return to Lothal, the setting of seasons 1 and 4 of Rebels. Now Lothal is an outer rim planet that is rich in some resources, so Thrawn tried to build a military factory there until Hera and the other rebels successfully fought them off the planet. And then we go to a ceremony where the toughest screw to ever do a turn in Shawshank, Clancy Brown, is reprising his role from Rebels as Governor Ryder Azadi. Now it is very cool that he gets to play the same role in live action, but I still wish that the original Ahsoka actor, Ashley Eckstein, could have brought the character to life in live action.
I mean, yeah, have you seen her Ahsoka cosplay? It is on point.
Yeah, it is. High five. Also, Clancy Brown has been in live-action Star Wars before. He played this Devaronian in The Mandalorian. In the crowd here, we see a Godel and a Rodian as they're dedicating a mural of the Spectres. That's the group from Star Wars Rebels. We actually saw this same mural in the finale of Rebels, but I'll talk about that a little later in the video. I do want to point out, though, that this is a Dave Filoni joint, so there are a couple of giant wolves here. And to stall for time, Ryder asked Junior Senator Jai Kell to vamp for him. Now, this character was also introduced in Star Wars Rebels, where he met Ezra at the Imperial Academy when Ezra was undercover. After they escaped, however, he joined Ryder's partisan fighters on Lothal, and he was apparently rewarded with a Senate seat.
Well, he was a veteran, like Jar Jar Binks.
Like Jar Jar Binks, that's right, Jar Jar was a veteran, which is the only way he could have possibly secured a Senate seat from Naboo. And then we smash cut to Sabine Wren riding a swoop bike down one of Lothal's long, uncrowded, perfectly maintained roads to nowhere. Now she's listening to rock music, which may seem out of character for Star Wars, but the special edition of Return of the Jedi gave us the song Jedi Rocks. And also, we hear rock-type music in the canon game Jedi Survivor. Now, the ships going after Sabine are very exciting. These are E-Wings, which Star Wars author Adam Lance Garcia has told me were first introduced in the Legends comic book Dark Empire, which shows Luke turning to the dark side 6 years after Return of the Jedi. Great comic, which also introduced the idea of the Emperor resurrecting himself with cloning.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
The Arabesh on her helmet here reads Babe, which is amazing, and the Arabesh on the road sign reads Caution and Sector 7, which feels like an homage to Homer Simpson's workplace. And I say that because in The Mandalorian there was another homage to Sector 7G in this Arabesh here. Now, on Sabine's jacket we can see the patch for Phoenix Squadron, which she designed, and it also inspired the symbol for the Rebel Alliance, which became the New Republic symbol these pilots wear on their helmets, just like how she drew the Loth Cat on her own helmet. See, Sabine is a passionate artist in the show Rebels, which is why Ahsoka seeks her out in this show.
Ezra, it's art. Everything has a meaning.
Sabine's passion for art also makes her a keen adversary for Thrawn, who can read a culture's artwork to understand their psychology and battle tactics.
It's the mark of the Phoenix Squadron.
It is a commitment, but to this world specifically.
And speaking of art, this patch on her jacket is a deep cut to the last season finale of The Mandalorian. Remember, Sabine is from the Mandalorian clan Ren, which has long been an ally of Bo-Katan, so this symbol represents your mom. Sabine is staying at the Lothal Communications Tower, which was an important location for her Rebel cell in the show Rebels. This is where they first broadcast a message from Lothal to the rest of the rebellion, letting everybody know that they were not alone in the galaxy.
Stand up together, because that's when we're strongest. As one.
And on the wall of her apartment, we see numerous kill marks for stormtroopers, and later we see Imperial helmets stashed here like trophies, just like how we saw trophy helmets above the bar in Season 3 of The Mandalorian. She has a pet Loth Cat, creatures that we saw all through Rebels, but first appeared in live action in Season 1 of The Mandalorian, and then she watches a message from Ezra on an old image caster, like the one we saw Qui-Gon use in The Phantom Menace right here.
It's in good order, except for the parts I need.
Ezra is now being played by Amon Esfandi, and he is wearing the same clothes that he wore in the Rebels finale just before their last mission against Thrawn. Now, the show Rebels was mostly made for kids, but it did slowly hint that Sabine and Ezra were developing feelings for each other, which would explain why she didn't want to be at the monument dedication earlier in the episode. She feels like there's nothing to celebrate with Ezra being gone. And then she has a Force dream where Ezra calls out to her. Now, Sabine didn't show any Force sensitivity in Rebels, so I like that later later on in episode 2, Yang says that she has had the worst force sensitivity he has ever seen in a student. But we have seen characters have force dreams that reveal visions to them in the past. I mean, the most famous example being when Anakin dreamed of Padme's death. Then Ahsoka arrives on Lothal in a shot that mirrors this one from the finale of Star Wars Rebels. Now, in the common room of Ahsoka's ship, notice these leaf patterns on the floor. These look very much like the insignia of the High Republic era of the Jedi Order, showing this kind of pre-Imperial design flourishes across her ship. Also, have to point out, this really bugged me. She's like holding this mug all through this scene. That cup is empty. There's nothing in that cup. What's she even drinking? They need to explain it. He says,
I go where I'm needed.
And that line is there to explain why she took time out of her Thrawn hunt to go chill with Luke at his new Jedi temple.
I'm an old friend of the family.
After we get a hint of the animosity between Sabine and Ahsoka.
You never make things easy.
Why should I? You never made things easy for me.
Yang tries to push the two of them together.
I see the two of you are getting reacquainted.
Which is actually a fun role for the droid to play in this show. He's kind of like Alfred, always pushing for Bruce Wayne to choose a normal life over Batman.
I feel that there's a certain weight that lifts when she is here.
Alfred, why don't you marry her?
Now, she talks about Anakin with regret.
Before the end of the Clone Wars, I walked away from him.
Which of course she did in the finale of Clone Wars Season 5. And I've always thought that she must have blamed herself for Anakin's fall, because it is kind of her fault. Had she stayed with the Jedi Order, then Anakin never would have become disillusioned against the Jedi Council, and maybe during the events of Revenge of the Sith, he wouldn't have been so resentful when they denied him the rank of Master.
Put me on the Council and not make me a Master? It's never been done in the history of the Jedi. It's insulting.
In fact, maybe she started training Sabine to redeem herself for walking away from Anakin to begin with. Meanwhile, Shin Hati is tracking down Sabine in a series of shots that are designed to mimic Darth Maul tracking down Anakin on Tatooine in The Phantom Menace. Then Sabine cracks the puzzle map, which, I mean, she lined up the triquetra and spun the lines around until they connected. It's not exactly like she's Benoit Blanc, but whatever, she understands art, so she was able to do it. Now, we are going to talk about this map in more detail later on, but I want to point out these runes. We first saw runes like this in the Knights of the Old Republic video games, and they're always around whenever Star Wars needs to show like an ancient language that doesn't have a corresponding alphabet. For instance, the writing on Jabba's throne is also in these same runes. Now, the map reveals that their destination is not in the unknown regions of the galaxy like I've always suspected. Instead, Thrawn and Ezra are now off together in a new galaxy. Now, there are some clues about this I'll talk about in just a bit, and also we have a really fun theory video coming out that explains all of this. I think it should be out tomorrow, so subscribe and ring the bell, make sure you don't miss a thing. Sabine goes onto the balcony to look at the sky, very reminiscent of how Luke was originally introduced in the rough cut of A New Hope.
There's two ships out there.
And then Shin Hati shows up, and Sabine unveils Ezra's old lightsaber. This was actually his second lightsaber. The one that doubled up as a blaster was destroyed after his first fight with Darth Vader. And I don't know about you, but when Sabine was stabbed with that lightsaber at the end of the episode, I was for sure thinking that she was gonna die. But to find out, let's move on to episode 2. The episode opens with Ahsoka appearing from the white haze of Sabine's dreams, similar to how she first appeared in the last episode. The show is introducing this interesting dynamic between Sabine and Ahsoka. Now remember, Ahsoka became Anakin's Padawan during the Clone Wars because they were both headstrong and rebellious, and Yoda thought they could learn from each other.
Master Yoda was very specific. I'm assigned to Anakin Skywalker, and he is to supervise my Jedi training.
Then Ahsoka asserted her independence when she walked away from the Jedi Order. Now years later, she found out that Anakin had become Vader, and I think she still feels guilty about this. Whereas Sabine also has a rebellious past. She comes from a high house of Mandalore, but she quit the Imperial Academy, dishonored her family, and became a warrior for the Rebel Alliance. Like I said earlier, Ahsoka probably walked away from Sabine in part because she was not powerful enough in the Force, so she was worried that she would get her Padawan killed. And now, her worst nightmare almost came true, as the episode opens with her reading Sabine's thoughts during her nightmares. Now again, there is a parallel here that she's thinking maybe if she had been around to read Anakin's nightmares about Padme, then she could have prevented his fall. Ahsoka is carrying around a lot of guilt. Now it's a little weird that we're exploring all of this in this show because these two characters barely spoke during Star Wars Rebels, but I think this dynamic is going to end up forcing both characters to change and grow, so I'm up for it. The medical droid treating Sabine is the 2-1B model, the same one that gave Luke his robot hand in The Empire Strikes Back. Ow. Now, this episode does begin with the relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine at its lowest point, as the Master is disappointed in the Padawan's failure. But the episode ends with Ahsoka allowing Sabine to learn from that failure and to move on.
Take us out, Padawan.
Then we do a typical Star Wars wipe to the old Night Sister Temple, where Baylan and Shin bring the map to Morgan Elsbeth. So the title of this episode is Toil and Trouble from Shakespeare's Macbeth.
Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble.
This is when the three witches read Macbeth a prophecy of his fate, saying that he'll basically cause double the problems in his life as he pursues the crown. In the context of this show, we are seeing the villains toil, like the work to build a giant hyperspace ring, and getting a small hint for the trouble their toil will bring. This title is also warning us about the coming of Thrawn. So the Night Sister Temple is built like a pagan shrine, and like, how do I put this? So pagans, Wiccans, witchcraft, folk magic, New Age religions, they're all very much like based around worship of the earth itself. Before Rome conquered much of Europe, the continent was filled with pagans who worshiped the earth, and witchcraft is tied to these ancient religions and shrines just like this one. So a Dathomirian witch shrine looking like a pagan temple is very clever. Archaeologists have long theorized that stone shrines like Stonehenge were used as calendars or a conduit to the spirits of nature, so it is fitting that these stones are a map to the stars. Also, the witches in Macbeth tell a prophecy that is self-fulfilling, and Baylan in this show seems to have the gift of foresight. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think we're going to look back at what a lot of Baylan sees and say, aha, that's how this connects to that part of the show. And then Morgan shows up in her cool as hell ship wearing full-on Dathomirian robes. She explains the temple, saying,
"Whose work is it?"
An ancient people from a distant galaxy.
So the big question of the series is, who is this mysterious race from another galaxy? We've actually got a video coming out tomorrow revealing who we think it is, but there are a lot of possibilities. In the Legends novels, the greatest threat post-Empire is a race from outside the galaxy called the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, they are immune to the effects of the Force and they hate all technology. So, I mean, we could be seeing them or an all-new race. Like I said, the video's coming out tomorrow, all about that. You're gonna love it. Subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss it. One big clue is that this star map includes the Purrgil. These are the hyperspace traveling whales that whisked away Thrawn and Ezra at the end of Rebels, and this chart shows them moving in a circle. Now, in Star Wars Rebels, Ezra once entered a gateway into a realm called the World Between Worlds, and this gate was marked by wolves running in a similar circle. In this case, the Purrgil circle represents a gateway to this other galaxy, perhaps because it is connected by Purrgil migration paths. So the Purrgil travel from one galaxy to another, essentially creating a loop. So it is very likely that at the end of Rebels, Thrawn and Ezra simply rode this Purrgil migration path to another galaxy. And now Morgan is trying to build a machine that will allow her to follow the same migration path to rejoin her master. And notice that when she activates the map, a green flame appears beneath it. This is the dark force magic of the Witches of Dathomir, which we originally saw in the Clone Wars series. Apparently, this is all part of old Jedi legend. As Baylan says,
"Pathway to Perry, children of the Jedi Temple call it that. It comes from old stories."
Now, that is interesting. You see, the first hyperspace travelers followed the migration paths of the Purrgil, and it's been speculated that these earliest hyperspace navigators were force sensitive.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in Star Wars, hyperspace computers let you know if you're about to materialize inside of something, like Han explains here.
Without precise calculations, we'd fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and then it'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?
But before those computers existed, navigators used the Force to see the future and then navigate, so they would know not to exit hyperspace because you were going to be in the middle of a sun or something. Now, this is still how people navigate in the unknown regions of the galaxy. So, if the Jedi were telling this story of a place that existed via hyperspace traveling whales, then it connects to the earliest Jedi building the Republic by connecting planets through hyperspace. Morgan says,
Thrawn calls to me, across time and space.
Notice how she said across space and time. Now earlier I mentioned Ezra passing through a wolf portal, and that led to the World Between Worlds, a place where he could access all of time and space at once. Ahsoka actually spent a lot of time in that realm after Ezra used it to save her life, so I think that's going to connect as well. They also reference the Eye of Sion, which is this large ring they're building. I think it's called the Eye of Sion because another word for Sion is heir, as in Thrawn being the heir to the Empire, just like the original Thrawn novels, the heir to the Empire trilogy. And after Morgan leaves, we learn what Baylan wants for Shin and himself.
Power.
And we actually have another video coming out soon explaining what we think is up with these two, and we already did a great video breakdown about how they could be the Knights of Ren.
Who's the Knights of Ren?
That is the group that Kylo Ren led in The Rise of Skywalker. So, moving on. Ahsoka retraces Sabine's fight using Force echoes like she did in the first episode.
And like Cal Kestis in those delightful Fallen Order video games.
That's right, and later Sabine redeems her mistake when she scans information from the droid's broken head. Now notice that during this whole sequence, Ahsoka and Sabine are never panicking, but Hu Yang is.
I'm pulling the plug.
This is because if the head was actually about to explode, then Force-sensitive people would see it coming in time to disconnect the wires, but Hu Yang has no connection to the Force, so he panics. This goes all the way back to A New Hope, when Obi-Wan's spirit told Luke to disconnect his targeting computer, to rely on the Force instead of on machinery. So then they travel to Corellia, the home planet of Han Solo and the birthplace of the Millennium Falcon. As they fly in, you can see a Rebel blockade runner like the Tantive 4 in A New Hope, and all over the planet we see Imperial Star Destroyers being dismantled for their scrap, just like we saw in Coruscant during The Mandalorian Season 3. Imperial machinery is being repurposed for peaceful means, which is a nice sentiment, but as we'll see in a minute, it's another symptom of the New Republic being overconfident in their victory and not seeing the looming threat of the First Order under their noses. And here we can see a platform made from the legs of an old AT-AT walker, and we saw a similar one in The Mandalorian Season 2 right here. This ship is called the Phantom. It is a small shuttle that breaks off from Hera's main ship, the Ghost. The droid standing beside her is an RA-7 protocol droid like we first saw in the Jawa Sandcrawler in A New Hope. But Star Wars fans in the know would have realized that this droid meant bad things were about to happen, because these are nicknamed the Death Star droids, because they were used primarily on the first Death Star. Similarly, later in the episode we see that all the protocol droids are dark red, which in Star Wars always means they're serving the Sith or the Empire. And of course, Hera's droid Chopper is there, and when I saw this episode in the theater, he even got an applause break. Chopper appeared in live action before, getting a cameo right here in Rogue One. I don't know, I don't get it. Like, people love Chopper and I just don't see it. It's like he's little Sebastian and I'm Ben.
So what am I missing? What's the deal with this pony?
During their tour, the foreman says,
"You will still find ex-Imperials at every level of the New Republic government."
And this is actually very good to hear, because it explains one reason the First Order was able to take over the galaxy so quickly in the new trilogy. And he also says,
"My loyalty is to my investors."
And later Ahsoka named their main motivation.
It's not loyalty. It's greed.
And this was also touched on in The Last Jedi, when we learned that the biggest industry in the galaxy was war.
Made his bank selling weapons to the bad guys. I'm the good.
He lists several droids, including CCLs. These are the binary load lifters that C-3PO mentions in A New Hope.
Sir, my first job was programming binary load lifters, very similar to your evaporators in most respects.
And the IW-37, or pincer loader droid that we first saw here very briefly in Revenge of the Sith. Then Hera spots a hyperdrive engine from an SSD, or a Superstar Destroyer. These are the biggest ships in the Empire, like Darth Vader's flagship, the Executor. Hera knows that the mostly decommissioned New Republic fleet is not building anything of that size. So in this scene, old Imperial loyalties flare up. For the Empire! Ahsoka then duels an HK assassin droid and a former Sith Inquisitor named Merrick. Now, the Sith Inquisitors were Force-using henchmen of Palpatine's, and they were tasked with hunting down the remaining Jedi Knights after the Purge. We have seen them in Rebels, and Obi-Wan, and in the Fallen Order games. At least I'm assuming Merrick was an Inquisitor because of how he's dressed and the spinning red lightsaber blade that he carries. Now, it's very interesting how they're keeping this character in the shadows. Makes me wonder if this is going to end up being a character that we've seen before from the Clone Wars or the Bad Batch. Hera chases after the transport ship as Chopper gets up to his old annoying ass antics.
No, I did not go through your stuff.
Hey, wait a minute. How were they able to track a ship? Because in The Last Jedi, they said you couldn't track a ship through hyperspace.
They've tracked us through light speed.
That's impossible.
Well, Doug, remember, in A New Hope, Vader placed a tracking beacon like this one on the Millennium Falcon, allowing the Imperials to track the Millennium Falcon to Yavin 4. In The Last Jedi, no beacon was used. That's why it was a surprise. And when Ahsoka watches the transport leave, it is framed just like Darth Maul watching the Naboo shuttle escape in The Phantom Menace. Back to Lothal, where Sabine starts to take her life seriously. She slowly lays out her Mandalorian armor, which is hundreds of years old, passed down through her entire family, but she's painted it to reflect her own life and personality. Now, during the show Rebels, this pauldron featured several different animals, but now she has painted it with a Purgil, probably a memorial to how she lost Ezra at the end of that show. And the helmet itself was originally painted in the style of Bo-Katan's Night Owls, but now she has personalized that helmet as well. Then she cuts off her hair with her vibro blade that she used in the series Rebels, and we've actually seen these blades in live action before in The Mandalorian. The Arabesh on the side of these transports reads police as the New Republic is arresting the Imperials. In the crowd, we also see a Gran and a Celestin security officer like Lando's co-pilot Yen Yub. And then we get another moment that is a recreation of the finale of Rebels, where Sabine touches this new mural, which is replicated exactly from how it was in the show. And then Ahsoka shows up in her T6 shuttle. Even though this is slightly different in the animation, with Ahsoka holding up a staff and Sabine putting on her helmet, I think this is actually where the show catches up to this moment in the Rebels finale. So the ending of Rebels kind of misdirected us. I always thought that like Ahsoka and Sabine were leaving right after the events of Return of the Jedi, then they failed to find Ezra and so they returned to Lothal. But it turns out they they left for this mission several years after Return of the Jedi ended. And I thought this was really fun because it gives Dave Filoni a chance to turn one of his animated sequences into live action, whereas during the Bad Batch he did the opposite, taking moments from Revenge of the Sith and animating them in the Clone Wars style. So Morgan is building a giant hyperspace ring. We actually saw Jedi starfighters use these in the prequels. You see, Jedi starfighters were too small to house hyperspace engines, so they used these rings instead. And this all goes back to the idea of the circular Purgil gateway, and the Jedi using the Force to navigate through hyperspace. Now Morgan communicates with this weird hologram tech that we've not really seen before. Notice that the light shines from the ceiling, but everybody is rendered very clearly. Now this is a lot like the chamber where Kylo Ren spoke to Snoke in The Force Awakens. That hologram was rendered very realistically, just like the ones in the show. But notice how after the call ends, the light turns off and the dust remains in the air and kind of settles. It's almost like Morgan is like conjuring this dirt into their shapes, aided by the light of the projector. It's very cool, and I'm wondering if Snoke used this same technology to talk to Kylo Ren. This could be one of many ways that this series is going to bridge the gap between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And just a reminder, everybody, to save money on your streaming services and block your ads today, go to nordvpn.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description. Then you get 4 months for free on a 2-year plan plus a huge discount. Click our link and get your computer protected today. But we want to know what you guys thought of these first 2 episodes of Ahsoka. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, ring that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.